Legend of Ancient Chinese Love. Meng Jiangnu. Painting. Xu Huiwang. After Yingzheng, the king of Qin, unified 6 countries, he wanted to be emperor. Then he called the ministers and asked them for their opinions. One of the ministers, named Li Si, said that Emperor Tai would be a good choice. Yingzheng did not like the word Tai. He touched his son's head and decided to call himself Shihuang, first emperor. He meant to let his children and grandchildren to pass the throne from generation to generation. On, and forever. Qin Shihuang dreamed that the whole country would always belong to his own family. He was afraid that the people would rebel. So he ordered all the weapons and even raw iron be collected all over the country. In Xianyang, Qin Shihuang had 12 giant iron statues made of the ironware which was collected from local people, and then located them just outside the palace gate. He was then afraid that those who had read ancient books would use retro to oppose him, so he captured them and buried them alive. He called common people blackheads. He did not allow people gather together. Whenever 2 people were seen talking in the street, he thought that they were speaking ill of him. Then these speakers were caught and killed. At that time, Xiongnu and some foreign nations often invaded Qin. Qin Shihuang then sent his general Meng Tian to attack Xiongnu. Meng Tian took 300,000 troops to the north to attack Xiongnu, occupied Xiongnu's place, and drove them far away. However, Qin Shihuang was still worried. He thought if he could have the Great Wall, which was built by Wuling, king of the state of Zhao, extended by 10,000 miles, then Xiongnu would never come in. Then the construction of the Great Wall started. Qin Shihuang did not treat the blackheads as human beings. He forced groups of ordinary people to build the Great Wall in the border area. The minister Li Si made many strict laws, so that whoever broke the laws be sent to the construction site. There were more and more people who were forced to go and build the Great Wall. Later, Li Si gave another order that all books in the country, except those about the history of Qin, be collected and burned. This order required that those who did not hand over the books, to be burned within 30 days, would be sent to build the Great Wall. People had nothing to do but hand over the books and burn them, one after another. There was a young man named Wan Xiliang who liked to read very much. He was really reluctant to hand over his books, so he buried them in the yard. However, his secret was known by the local authorities, and he was going to be arrested. Fortunately, a friend sneaked over and told Xiliang to run away quickly. Wan Xiliang knew that if he was arrested, he would be sent to build the Great Wall like those who did not hand it over the books. He had to escape hurriedly. He ran 70 or 80 miles in one breath and did not dare to stay in local inns. The sun was about to set, and it was getting dark. Then he saw a garden with its gate half open, and he went into the garden. Nobody was in the garden, and he did not dare to go further in. He hid himself behind the big rockery and wanted to sleep for the night. After a while, a young lady came out from the front yard. She was Meng Jiang, who was later called Meng Jiangnu. Meng Jiangnu came to the garden to enjoy the cool, shaking a round fan in her hand. She walked to the lotus pool. Wan Xiliang hurriedly hid himself and peeped out from the small hole in the rockery. Meng Jiangnu was watching and enjoying the lotuses, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. When she counted to 7, she saw from the water reflection there were 2 eyes from the small hole in the rockery. She was frightened, crying, "Thief, thief," and her fan fell into the water. Hearing the crying, people living in the garden all came out, servants with sticks. Meng's father held his walking stick up in his hand and asked, "Where's the thief?" Meng Jiangnu pointed to the rockery stone, and the servants ran over and searched. Then Wan Xiliang was pulled out from behind the stone. Meng Yuany. Yuany indicates honorable title for gentleman. Did not think he looked like a thief. He took him to the hall of their house and questioned carefully. Wan Xiliang described what had happened. Meng Yuany sympathized him for what had happened and accommodated him in the study. Meng Yuany himself was also a scholar, yet all he had were those books about medicine or fortune. Wan Xiliang stayed in Meng's house and got familiar with everyone. He often talked with Meng Jiangnu about the cruel tyranny of Qin Shihuang and the suffering of the people. One day, they were taking a walk while Wan Xiliang asked Meng Jiangnu why she took him as a thief that day. Meng Jiangnu said, "It was because he hid himself and seemed suspicious." Meng Jiangnu wanted a lotus. Wan Xiliang then picked up a twin lotus and gave it to her. Meng Yuany saw the harmony and intimacy of the two young people. Meng Yuany also liked Wan Xiliang. After talking with his wife, they decided to have him be their son-in-law. Then they came and asked their daughter's opinion. Meng Jiangnu agreed happily. Wan Xiliang was very happy and excited when he got to know this. He then went to the garden to find Meng Jiangnu. Meng Jiangnu was waiting for him in the garden. They talked with each other in a low voice, both excited about their happy life and future. A few days later, Meng Yuany chose a good date and held a wedding for Meng Jiangnu and Wan Xiliang. No matter how the Meng family tried their best to hide it, the news still spread that Meng Yuany had a stranger become their son-in-law. When it came to the ears of the county magistrate, he felt it suspicious and immediately sent his men to arrest Xiliang. They came to Meng's house and rudely rushed in. And they captured Wan Xiliang in the bridal chamber. At that time, the punishment was so terrible that Wan Xiliang could not stand the torture. He had no choice, but admitted that he hid his books and escaped to the Meng's house. With his confession, they ruled his crime according to the law which was made by Li Si, and Wan Xiliang was then tattooed on the face. Then he was assigned far away to build the Great Wall. There were also many other offenders going together. Their parents, wives and children came to see them off. Meng Jiangnu and her father came to see Wan Xiliang off, weeping over their misfortune. Seeing her husband being escorted away, Meng Jiangnu couldn't help crying. Many women and the elderly saw their husbands or sons being escorted away, they all cried loudly. Meng Jiangnu was helped home by her father, weeping and crying day and night. Then Wan Xiliang and those offenders walked a long way through mountains and rivers. They came to the border area and there was a desolate desert in front them. Since then, Wan Xiliang had been suffering from the hard labor with other offenders, and he became thin and weak. He worked as a sentry in the daytime. At night, he had to work hard, carrying sand and stones to build the Great Wall. In winter, he had to endure hunger and cold. Finally, he exhausted his strength and died. Meng Jiangnu missed her husband every day. She was weeping and sewing all day, rushing to make some winter clothes for her husband. Then she wanted to send the clothes by herself to her husband. Her parents had to agree and sent a 14 or 15 years old page boy to escort her. Meng Jiangnu set out with the boy. She stopped weeping, busy on their way every day. On the way, they only saw seniors, children and women. Middle-aged men were all captured and sent to Xianyang to build the Afong Palace. Later, Meng Jiangnu's page boy was caught and taken away from her. Meng Jiangnu had to be alone on her way, carrying the winter clothes with her and begging all along the way. One day, she came to a gate of the Great Wall. Seeing that she was alone, the guards at the gate deliberately embarrassed her and wanted her to sing a song for them, and then they would let her pass through. Meng Jiangnu started to sing out her pain and suffering. Meng Jiangnu sang and cried, and the guards were stunned. They could not tell whether it was singing or crying. Then Meng Jiangnu went through the gate, still singing and crying. She had a hard time and finally came to the place where the Great Wall was being built. She saw plenty of offenders working hard and lots of skeletons lying on the ground. She had to ask and identified one by one. Nobody seemed to be like Wan Xiliang, and nobody even knew him. It turned out that the names of these offenders, who were forced to build the Great Wall, had already been cancelled by Qin Shihuang. Tens of thousands of them were numbered, and called Black Heads. For 10 days and nights, she walked every corner of the area and could not find her husband. She had to come in front of some human skeletons, knelt down and cried. She was so sad that the sun seemed not daring to come out and shine. She was so grieved that people all stopped working. Hearing her crying, some workers painfully lowered down their heads, and some held their heads high, angrily. This man remembered his young wife. That guy thought about his parents and children. And this man was thinking that his white-haired grandpa once knelt down to pray to replace his grandchild to go to build the wall. This guy was thinking about his only son who saw the tattooed characters on his dad's face, crying. Another man could not wait to fly back home right away, thinking of the crops that had not been harvested. This guy, a drummer previously, was so angry that he held a spade just like a drum hammer and kept hitting the wall. Tens of thousands of people were suffering. They knew it was Qin Shihuang who killed their wives and children and destroyed their families. The more they thought about it, the more angrier they became. Finally, their anger broke out. They climbed up to the wall and destroyed the Great Wall they built by themselves. Then one part of the Great Wall fell down. It was destroyed by the angry people, and also by the crying of Meng Jiangnu. The sound of the collapse of the Great Wall alarmed Fusu, the oldest son of Qin Shihuang, who was sent there to supervise the construction. Fusu came to the place where the wall fell and invested. Fusu called Meng Jiangnu up and told her that some offenders were sent to Xianyang to build Afang Palace, and Wan Xiliang may be among them. Meng Jiangnu heard this, and there was hope again in her heart. The next morning, she left the border area. She had a hard time once again, and finally came to Xianyang. Afang Palace was already built up. And within 200 miles around Xianyang, there were about 70 palaces. An old man told Meng Jiangnu that in these palaces, there were lots of beautiful women recruited from all over the world. She was told that lots of workers who built the Afang Palace had suffered to death. Meng Jiangnu began to cry over the palace for her husband. Qin Shihuang was reading the memorial. Suddenly, he heard a woman's crying outside the palace. Then he ordered his man to arrest the woman for interrogation. When Qin Shihuang saw Meng Jiangnu, he thought she was more beautiful than those who were recruited. He decided to make her stay at Liangshan Palace. Meng Jiangnu knew she could not refuse. Then she wanted Qin Shihuang to set up a sacrificial altar by the river to hold memorial service for her husband and those who died for the building of the Great Wall and the Afang Palace. She even asked Qin Shihuang to hold the service by himself. Otherwise she would not stay. Qin Shihuang had to accept it. When the sacrificial altar was completed, he came to the altar and held the service as promised. When service was over, Meng Jiangnu began to curse on Qin Shihuang, crying. She cursed that he was a tyrant and his world could not last long. Qin Shihuang got very angry and roared like thunder. He ordered his soldiers to kill her. Before those men did it, Meng Jiangnu jumped into the river below the altar. When she was brought out of the water, Meng Jiangnu was already dead. The sound of her crying and cursing spread all over the city and the country. Meng Jiangnu's curse soon came true. Qin Shihuang lived only to 50 years old, and Qin perished by Dynasty II. The Great Wall built by the ancient people with their blood and sweat has been preserved as one of the great monuments until now. And the story of Meng Jiangnu crying down the Great Wall has always been spread among the people.